it's a bit enabling, like you're a pro skateboarder that has, at that time, what we thought was like, just an endless stream of money and the ability to do whatever we wanted with that, no schedule. You get to travel all over it and be able to do what you love to do. But at the same time, there can be some abuse with that, like for me, I think a lot of the career that I had was spent neglecting the actual, like I would be in another country, supposed to be doing something like skateboarding and I was worried about like, where can I go drink? Like that was so for me, it was just abusing I think it's enabling me to be able to abuse, that situation, to be able to turn into an alcoholic through that. So for me, that's what I mean by that. Yeah.
How was it? I saw on your Instagram, you're relatively recently 10 years sober.
Yeah.
So first of all, congrats on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Seeing from an outsider's perspective how your life was like, and I'm sure it wasn't like exactly like that, but I kind of feel like it was probably close.
It was pretty close.
Yeah. Like the video seemed super unfiltered.
Yeah.
And which I have a bunch of questions about that, but how did you end up going sober? How was that path? And at what point in your career did you start thinking that, this is something that I want to do? I would like to one day stop. Did you always know you're one day going to stop?
No, I was the opposite. I think that, I started drinking when I was about 14, 15 years old and started drinking consistently through that. At that time, you could do it and you can maintain whatever it is you're doing into your 20s. You could still sort of have that behavior and it not really affect you physically. And then, for me, I got into drugs through that. And there was never really, for me, I always knew, like, I was like, I don't want to be doing coke or smoking crack. I don't want to be doing that. I knew I didn't, but I always thought the drinking was a big part of me. Like I thought like that was a part of like me, being able to be who I truly was. And I think that's kind of that's the tricky part of it, and that's the tricky part of alcoholism is that it sort of, it fools you into thinking that it's part of who you are and your personality and every decision that you make. Into my 30s, I had the tendency to sometimes get sort of, violent when I drank. So there would be incidents that would happen along the way and I would brush them off. And then it just got to a point where I was on a trip to Colorado and I got in a fight and I cut a person's neck and then they almost died and it was a whole thing, like it was a whole process that I went through where I was looking at long-term prison sentence. And through me getting sober, and defending, myself of, that I was defending myself, I was able to get off with 5 years probation and 2 felonies. So wow. For me, that was sort of the bottom that I needed to be able to hit to where I could go, okay, if I'm looking at 30 plus years in prison and I had 2 kids at that time, then they're going to be full grown adults that'll never see me again really with freedom. So I through the 14 months that I was going through that court case, I got sober through that, and I started working a 12-step program. Not really that well, and once the court case was finished, I started to drink again, and I realized at that point for the first time in my life that I knew what I didn't want to do anymore. So for me, it was the night that I drank after the whole thing had happened, that I had been sober for 14 months, that I knew that I wanted to be sober. And for me, it's still a work in progress. I've been sober for 10 years now consistently, but it's still, for me, I know that if I disconnect for too long, I'll slip back into my, there's a lot of self-work that I did through that. So yeah, it wasn't something long. That was a long answer, but the short answer is that there was never a point through that. It was fun for me. And I thought that was who I was. And really what it was doing was masking my true self.
So it was drinking was kind of part of your identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what do you feel like your identity is now that you've been, well, it's been 10 years, but as you said, as a work in progress, how do you feel what's your identity now?
Well, I think fundamentally, a lot of the things changed. Like a lot of my health, a lot of my behavior through those years, and it's not saying that I was, it was selfish and self-centered behavior, so everything was about me. So I think the biggest change for me fundamentally about who I am is that I try to think about myself less and try and think about my family, friends, or others a little bit more than that, or at least think about them in some way. So I think that there's things that I've learned about why I was actually drinking and behaving the way that I was, that I've tried to put in place now. There's so many areas of my life that have been changed that it's hard to give a direct answer to that, other than, I try and be more compassionate or more empathetic. I try and be less self-seeking and less self-serving, so I think there's a number of, I think that in conversation, you would be able to identify that easier than even the question. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I have one of my best friends growing up. I'm not going to say his name because I don't know if he wants his name to be said, but we grew up skateboarding together. And it's one of those situations where you sleep over each other's house every day. You watch all the same videos every day. I got like an iPod and I downloaded a bunch of music from, like, I would watch the skate videos, find the artist, and then download the whole artist album, and then like go forward like that. He got an iPod, he synced it to my shit. We were just like homies. And he got into drinking at probably like 14, 15. Mm-hmm. He looked older, and somehow he got a fucking fake ID, and he started going right to the bars and shit, and then he got our other homie to go too, or maybe he didn't get him to go, but whatever. And then they started drinking and stuff, and then but now later in life, like we're at the age that we're at, and he's been finding out that people like you and people like Reynolds and a bunch of people are advocating for a healthier lifestyle, and like trying to curtail the drinking to an extent, maybe not go fully sober, but it's a conscious thing where he's thinking about it. And he was telling me like, I listened to this episode with whoever, or like even Hasoy, and like what he thinks about life and doing that, and like I'm trying to work out, and I'm trying to do this, and I'm trying to drink less, and I'm trying to and it's awesome because I heard in some interview you did that you want to do that. You want to, I guess, influence in that way. I don't know. I don't know necessarily if you use those words, but it's something that you're putting out there. Like you're doing this, and people are influenced by it.
I think it's inspiring in a more positive way. Like I think that what we did, like you talked about it a little bit. Growing up and watching those videos and stuff, and that was fun, and that was a real time in our lives, and we weren't hiding that. It was just who we were and what we were doing as 20-something, living a dream that we had. And now I think that what's good about being sober in that is that I don't, if somebody asks me about that, I talk about it. I don't push my sobriety or recovery on anybody. But at the same time, if I can show that here's what I went through, here's where I went to, and here's where I am now through this, then somebody else that's struggling, that can be going through the same sort of situations, can look at that and go, oh, okay, if he made it through. And that's the same thing with growing up watching your favorite skaters. If they could do a trick, you're like, well, why can't I? It's basically, to me, it's a similar experience as to that, because I'm still influenced by people that when I see, I'm like, that's amazing. That guy's got 35 years of sobriety. I'm like, fuck, I want that. How do you do it? So I think that makes sense, it's cool. And I think that now, you know, those are the positive parts about social media, or like, you know, the things that, you know, podcasts and things like that, is that people get to genuinely talk about their experiences like that and show it, so that the, you know, the influence can, or the, you know, the inspiration can be something that can be positive.